we are now going to look at the skeletal muscle gross anatomy. So this here is your skeletal muscle, or one of them, and here obviously is the bone, and this is connected via a tendon. And the outer casing of this skeletal muscle is known as the epimysium. And the epimysium's function is to protect the muscle, to minimize friction from other bones rubbing against it and other muscles rubbing against it during movement. And so this protects the muscle as a whole, as during movement, obviously, though that muscle could rub against other muscles and bones, which would create friction. So this is here to minimize that. It also forms the tendon. So the tendon is part of the epimysium. It's just the end of it. Now, inside the epimysium, there are several bands of these fasciculi, and here is an example of a singular fascicle. And the fascicle is contained by the perimysium. So the perimysium is these blue bits here on the diagram. And the perimysium also protects the muscle, but protects the fascicles, or the fasciculi, as as a plural. So that is also a protective casing to reduce friction from other fasciculi rubbing against each other and causing friction. So that also reduces friction, but between the fasciculi. Now, inside the fasciculi, there are several muscle fibers, and in the muscle fibers, the number of them vary. So the larger the muscle, usually the higher amount of muscle fibers there will be in a singular fascicle. So, for example, in the rectus femoris, in the quadricep group, that would have a lot of muscle fibers in a singular fascicle, as it's a large muscle and produces a lot of power in its movement. But muscles in the hand, for example, which focus on finer movements, won't need as many muscle fibers, as the movements are much more finer and usually less powerful. And on the outside of these muscle fibers, you'll find the endomysium, which insulates the muscle fiber, which is seen here, but is on all of them, surrounding the muscle fiber, which, well, as I said, insulates it, so the electrical impulse is then or can be sustained effectively, so can be sent across the entire muscle, so it all can contract in sync, so at once. Inside each muscle fibers, you have the inside them, each muscle fibers, you have myofibril, and these myofibril are surrounded in an outer casing of sarcolemma. So the sarcolemma is the outer casing inside each myofiber. And in that which obviously also protects the myofibril from damage and friction from other myofibril. And in the myofibril, that is where contraction actually happens. And each section, repeated section of the myofibril, is known as a sarcomere. And in those sarcomere, that is where the sliding filament theory takes place, with the actin and the myosin over here. And we'll look at this in more detail later on, but effectively the actin and myosin bond together to pull the Z lines here, so each side of the individual sarcomeres close together to cause the overall muscle to contract. So that is effectively the skeletal muscle growth anatomy. So we shall move on to muscle rolls. Now this is still looking at skeletal muscles, and in elbow flexion, for example, there are always 4 functional groups. Elbow flexion is just the example in this case. So the prime mover, which is also known as the agonist in elbow flexion, is the brachialis muscle, and that is this muscle here. And the prime mover is responsible for the largest workload, so is responsible for the movement. So the brachialis in elbow flexion pulls on either the radius or ulna to decrease the gap here to create flexion. So this muscle, the brachialis, contracts and pulls these bones, or the forearm, up to create flexion. This, for example, would be done in a bicep curl, for example, and the biceps brachii here would also help with that when there's more of a resistance. So when there's less of a resistance, the brachialis is the main prime mover. So that can be applied to the gifted and talented group when training, doing a bicep curl, but with low resistance, as the biceps brachii would then take the place as the prime mover. The agonist and the antagonist, of this movement would be the triceps brachii. And so that is this muscle here. And the antagonist creates slight resistance, not to stop movement, but to prevent overshoot. So effectively protects the muscle and the joint and tendons, connective tissues. So protects from damage. So creates slight resistance to maintain control of the movement. So there is a safe speed of that movement. Next would be the synergist, and that in this case is the biceps brachii. So that's this muscle here. And the synergist helps the prime mover, so it adds force and stability to the bone it's working against. So in our example of a bicep curl, so the upward phase would be elbow flexion, and in the upward phase, the brachialis obviously is working as the prime mover, and the biceps brachii is the synergist, as it's helping the brachialis to lift that dumbbell up to create flexion, as the dumbbell is creating resistance from it. Next and finally, the fixator is the rhomboids, which prevents rotation, so unwanted movements, and stabilizes this joint. So the rhomboids is found on the scapula here, and that just creates stability in this movement. So maintains the correct movement. So during a bicep curl, we don't want rotation in the shoulder joint, as this could, or due to bad technique, that could happen, but that could then also lead to injury. So we need to, well, that muscle, the rhomboids, as the fixator in this case, is very, very important, as it effectively is preventing injury, so, and allowing us to do this movement, as it's making it just do that movement and nothing else. So the performer doing the bicep curl, if correct technique is maintained, then there's a lower chance of injury. Obviously, like if they've done too high a weight, then injury could occur in different ways, but if they've done correct technique, that means that no other unwanted movements will occur. That's going to end this video. So next video we will look at the major muscles of the body, the major skeletal muscles of the body.